My name is Jace Cannon,
And my name is Justin Miller.
and today we're going to be taking you through our presidential project on the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter.
We will be covering his major domestic and foreign policies, grading his performance, and talking about his overall legacy. Let's get into it.
Before we dive into policies, let's talk about what Jimmy Carter actually was. Carter was born in Plains, Georgia, and served as a Democrat.
Before becoming the president, he was the governor of Georgia. What made Carter stand out going into the 1976 election was his focus on human rights and honesty.
This was huge because the country had just gone through the Watergate scandal under Nixon, and people were hungry for a leader they could actually trust. Even after his presidency, Carter continued to be a respected figure.
He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002 for his decades of work promoting peace and human rights around the world.
Now let's get into Carter's domestic policies. We're going to be looking at two major ones, the National Emergencies Act and the creation of the Department of Education. Both of these had real, lasting impacts on how the United States government operates today.
First up, the National Emergencies Act. Now, this was actually passed in 1976, right before Carter took office, but it shaped the environment he governed in and reflected exactly the kind of reform he stood for. The law was designed to limit presidential emergency powers, which had previously been pretty unchecked. Under this act, Congress was required to regularly review any national emergency declared by the president. This was a direct response to concerns about executive overreach, and it was a major step towards increasing government accountability. Basically, it made sure no president could just declare an emergency and do whatever they wanted to without oversight.
We're given the National Emergencies Act an A. Here's why. This policy was effective, it had a long-lasting impact, and it genuinely improved government accountability. It's a law that's still on the books today and still matters. There's some controversy around it. Recent years have shown that presidents can still push the boundaries of emergency powers, but the framework itself has a meaningful and necessary reform. That's why it earned the top grade.
The next domestic policy is the Department of Education. Carter created this in 1979, making it an official cabinet-level department of federal government. Before this, education was kind of scattered across different agencies. By creating a dedicated department, Carter centralized federal oversight of education programs, making it easier to support schools and students nationwide. And it worked. The Department of Education still exists today and continues to manage federal education funding and policy.
We're giving the Department of Education a B. On the positive side, this had a massive long-term impact. It's been around for over 45 years and continues to help schools and students across the country. It brought national level support to education that didn't really exist before. However, it's been politically controversial since day one. Some argue that education should be left to the states, and there's ongoing debate about whether a federal department actually improves outcomes. We docked it a letter grade because of the controversy and legitimate questions about its effectiveness. The long-term presence and impact keep it solidly in B territory.
Putting it all together, we'll be giving Carter's domestic policy record an A-. Both policies we've looked at have had strong, long-term impacts that you can still see today. Carter showed a consistent focus on reform and accountability. He wanted a government that was organized, honest, and answerable to the people. The slight deduction comes from the fact that some of his policies, like the Department of Education, remain controversial. But overall, his domestic record is one of genuine, lasting change.
Now let's shift to foreign policy. This is where Carter's presidency gets a lot more complicated. We're looking at two major events, the Camp David Accords, which was one of the greatest diplomatic achievements in modern American history, and the Iran hostage crisis, which was one of the most painful failures.
The Camp David Accords was a peace agreement reached in 1978 between Egypt and Israel, two countries that had been in conflict for decades. Carter personally invited Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israel Prime Minister Menachem Begin to Camp David, the presidential retreat in Maryland, and spent 13 days negotiating with them. Carter's role was crucial. He kept both sides at the table, worked through major disagreements, and helped broker a deal that significantly reduced the chances of another war in the Middle East. It was a remarkable achievement in diplomacy.
We're giving the Camp David Accords an A, and honestly, it could be an A+. This was a successful, historic peace agreement that showed real leadership. The Egypt-Israel peace treaty that came out of it is still in effect today, nearly 50 years later. Carter didn't react to a situation. He proactively brought two enemies together and made peace happen. This is exactly the kind of foreign policy legacy that earns top marks.
Unfortunately, the Iran hostage crisis is a very different story. In 1979, following the Iranian Revolution, a group of Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage. They were held for 444 days. Carter tried to negotiate their release but also authorized a military rescue mission called Operation Eagle Claw, but it failed catastrophically when helicopters malfunctioned in the desert. The hostages weren't released until the very day Carter left office in January 1981, which is widely seen as a final humiliation. The crisis severely damaged American confidence in Carter's reputation.
We're giving the Iran hostage crisis a D. This is hard to grade higher. The crisis dragged on for over a year, the rescue attempt failed, and Carter was unable to find a solution that brought the hostages home while he was still in office. It damaged the United States' image on the world stage and contributed heavily to Carter losing the 1980 election. The one reason it doesn't get an F is that the hostages did eventually come home safely, and Carter continued to work towards their release the entire time. But overall, this was a defining failure of his presidency.
Our final grade for Carter's foreign policy is a B-. It's really a mixed record. The Camp David Accords was one of the most successful acts of diplomacy any American president has ever pulled off. But the Iran hostage crisis was a prolonged, very public failure that the whole world watched. When you average out a historic success and a major failure, you land somewhere in the middle. And the severity of the hostage crisis pulls the grade down below a straight B.
So what's Jimmy Carter's overall legacy?
Carter brought honest, principled leadership to the White House at a time when Americans deeply needed it. His focus on human rights, both at home and abroad, set a tone for his entire presidency.
His record was genuinely mixed. Real successes, real failures. But what's interesting is that Carter's reputation actually grew significantly after he left office.
He spent decades doing humanitarian work through the Carter Center, helping monitor elections around the world and fighting diseases in developing countries.
He earned the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002 for that work. History has been kinder to Jimmy Carter than the voters were in 1980, and that says a lot about the kind of person he was.